All right, so welcome. I hope you're having a wonderful summer and with all the heat, we're about to burn up here in Missouri. So I don't know where you are in the nation, but we're about to burn up here. I know some of you are tapping in from Ukraine, so welcome. So today we're going to be talking about creating stable and predictable project performance. And I've got 4 books I'm going to recommend to you in just a moment. So I'm going to put them in the chat, but I'm going to show them to you as well. These are 4 books that will help you kind of solidify how to do your performance, how to be able to come up with your performance process, and what should you be measuring. Because just because I measure something or your organization measures something, you might not be measuring the right stuff. And definitely down the road, there's going to be some things that you're not measuring correctly. So let's go ahead and get started here this morning with creating stable and predictable project performance. Now, as we look at project performance, performance is one of those things that's very difficult for some organizations. And part of it is we either don't measure the right stuff, or in many cases, we don't measure much of anything except for cost or schedule. And so a lot of times there's some other type of measurements that might help us a little bit. We'll talk about those very briefly today as we go through those, that some other things that might actually help you be able to anticipate what is happening to your performance down the road. So there's some reasons why organizations who do have predictable performance have such good, consistent performance happening. And one of those could be that goals are more precise and without ambiguity. And so if you look at your performance and the metrics that are being measured, how much ambiguity is there? Is it very much a subjective kind of thing? And so when I say this, this is not a scolding kind of thing, but we have a lot of subjective things that we have in project management. I'm just trying to talk about the elephant in the room, as you know. And so one of the things that we see a lot of times is that we make a determination. Is it 50% complete or is it 70% complete? And that's that subjective piece I'm talking about. And the thing is that what's the difference between a 50% and a 60% or a 50% and a 70%? And once again, that comes from that person who's looking at that. And of course, the challenge with that, as you know, is over the next several weeks, it stays at that 50 or 70% for week afterwards. And so we don't seem to be making any progress on that. So a lot of times that's what I'm talking about with that subjective or that a lot of ambiguity with that. Now, resource adjustment is more precise. The right resources are working on the project when we have better metrics because we know who we're going to need. And we have different plans for being able to fix some kind of problem that's going to happen on the project. And we all have problems. There's no silver bullet on this. We all experience this. Now, in performance, though, what you're having to do is constantly get feedback on what's happening with the project. Now, Kerzner is who I've quoted here. I've quoted him on the next 3 slides because Kerzner has a book out on project metrics, KPIs, and dashboards. And so this is it right here. And I'm going to put it on the chat here in just a moment. But it is an excellent tool. And if you're not familiar with Harold Kerzner, there are more graduate level master's classes and programs that use his text than anything else. But Harold Kerzner is his name. Excellent tool, excellent resource for you. But his idea on feedback is something which can be measured. And so he really focuses on the hard and fast quantitative kind of effort that we're talking about here. And so what we start seeing here is that if you can't, his statement is if we can't be measured, it can't be managed. So he wants to know if that whatever it is that we're going after, whatever it is we're trying to achieve, how are we measuring it? And so even if we have to do a survey and take it from a qualitative to a quantitative after looking at a survey, the point is you're trying to quantify it some way. And his whole point on this is how are we going to be able to measure something to get it out of that subjective kind of mindset. He also goes into other pieces such as KPIs, which are key performance indicators. And he said they have to be measured and they have to bring value to the organization and they have to be quantified. Now, we've all had those customers who have said, well, I just want things to run better than they do right now. Or I want it to be faster than it does right now. I want it to not be as clumsy as it is right now. And all of those are some of those ambiguity terms that we all see, you know, and we think, oh man, just poke me in the eye. That means nothing to us on the side of a project. You know, we want to not be as clumsy. So now we have to dig deep into, okay, so what's clumsy to the customer? And they're being honest when they say that because they feel clumsy with something or they feel like things are not as efficient or effective. And they are being truthful, but the point is that's not going to be the right language to get it across to us so that we can make some changes. And so they have to be, they must lead to proactive project management. Now, when you're looking at KPIs or key performance indicators, a lot of times what you'll see is that a lot of times this is driving maybe a program or a part of a program, or it could be driving some of your strategic plans from your organization. And so a lot of times management's going to be watching these maybe even a little bit higher than they do on other things. So it's kind of interesting to be able to do this. Now, Kerzner in his book, I told you I had 2 or 3 of these, but Kerzner gave you a sample of some of the project management metrics. And many of these, I've been with many of your companies, and many of you use a lot of these. But the thing about metrics is that the metrics that you're using right now might not be the metrics in the future. And so if you look at this, you'll notice he's talking about cost variance and schedule variance, CPI, SPI. A lot of you do all of those, and especially those of you who are running federal projects, you're doing all the earned value suite of calculations, because in most federal projects, you're being mandated to do this. But then one of the things I thought was interesting here when he talked about this was, notice the last bullet point on the left, he said accuracy of the estimate. And all of us have had these discussions probably where we're questioning, here's an estimate, but how do we know it's accurate? How do we know that it's the real thing and somebody hasn't subjectively come up with that conclusion or come up with that estimate? And then the accuracy of the measurement. If we're measuring that the success of this performance indicator or this activity, how do we know that it really is a true measurement of what it's supposed to be measuring? So sometimes all of those pieces are pieces that feel a little klutzy, a little clumsy to us. Now, he goes on with the performance indicator drawbacks, and he said, and this is the drawback of all of our metrics. And so those of you who are working on this all the time from a compliance standpoint, this is what keeps you up at night, is how you're going to measure stuff. And I thought his questions are right on target here. He said, who will collect the information? When will the information be collected? When and how will the information be reported? What should be measured? When should it be measured, and who will perform the measurement? As you look at these questions, this is the dynamic that we struggle with all metrics, all performance, is how is it going to be reported, and who's going to collect that data and do that analysis? And obviously, from whoever's doing that analysis, there can be a bias to that analysis, a bias really bad or a bias really good. And so you're struggling with that a lot of times, and it takes us right back to what I said a moment ago. What is the accuracy of this report or of this estimate that we're reading here? Does this estimate really mean something? And does it really mean what we're being told it means? And so you have these dynamics that happens with a vendor. You have the dynamics also that happen internally with some of your people from time to time as well. All right, so when we talk about getting started with key performance indicators, this is a combination of both your project team, project manager, and of course, you're going to have management involved with this, because so many times your KPIs are going to connect to a strategic plan or part of a strategic plan, or it's going to be a program management plan, goal or something. So you're going to see it connected to other things normally outside of the project. Not always, but many times. So this is where you're going to discuss with management and the team, which indicators are they measuring the most? And you'll find yourself trying to brainstorm what is a realistic baseline for some of these and what's not. And a lot of times this is harder for those of your organizations that's going through sweeping change. This is much more difficult because your baseline is constantly moving for these key performance indicators. And so then you're looking at creating a plan for transitioning that KPI measurement from something that's struggling to something that's a little bit better and stronger. And then what happens is it's going to influence your project metrics that you're looking at. Now, let me jump ship here for just a moment. All of these things that we're looking at on collecting the data and pulling the information in, if any of you are doing any research right now on artificial intelligence for project management, you probably are noticing that this is the area that almost every writer out here and researcher says that artificial intelligence, they think in a very short time, we're talking 18 months, will have the capability to do some of this for us. And so what it will do is be an easy way to collect the data and show us the data of what's happening with the project. Now, I'm sure it's going to have hiccups just like anything else that we've ever done. But the thing is that by having a tool or a series of tools that's going to be able to pull from some of this, it's going to help us be able to get a better handle on the project. One researcher that I just finished his book that was saying, his statement was he felt like projects were going to jump from 65% successful to something like 80 or 90% successful. And so that's going to drive that whole AI boom even more from an area of project management. So we'll be talking about that as time comes on, and I'll actually do a webinar down the road. I don't have a date for it yet, but I'll do a webinar on that. And actually in October, for those of you at the Mid-Missouri group, I'm actually speaking on artificial intelligence and project management at your conference at the Lake of the Ozarks. And so that's the topic that I've actually chosen. So anyway, just to kind of give you, just to kind of wet your whistle, and many of you I know are already in the middle of all of this with if you're a security person, you're already in the middle of looking at all these things. And artificial intelligence is not a save all for everything. Don't mistake what I'm saying. But I think it's interesting for us as project managers and program managers to look at this as what kind of tools can come out of some of these things that would be very beneficial for us. So just something to wet your whistle a little bit. All right, so let's go right back. So reports are minimized in Agile. And so we were talking about gathering data and gathering information and getting reports and dashboards, and we're going to refer to that a couple of more times here. But one of the pieces of this I think that's going to be interesting for you to see is that on the traditional side, it's very much command and control, as all of you know. And so what happens is nothing changes without going through change control after we baseline the project. And so that means that everything that we're doing on performance, we're having to find the performance and measure it against that baseline. Now, for those of you who are doing Agile, Scrum, Kanban, all of those type of methodologies or frameworks is really how they like to say it. You notice that one of the things that happens is you don't have as much reporting. You do have some, and some organizations will have more than others, but much of that is reported verbally. You're reporting it, you're looking at some type of finished product or a piece of a product to hand off to that customer. So face-to-face interaction, teams are normally co-located. If in a perfect world, they're co-located. Your teams might not be co-located, and so many are not. But the point is, if you are co-located, then you're working on that one high priority project until you get it out the door, and then you work on the next one. For those of you who are not co-located, you're probably going to have a little bit more reporting because you're working on 3 or 4 projects simultaneously, and so you're having to report to the program management office, or you're having to report to a sponsor what's happening to the project periodically. So you're going to have some similarities that are going to be like traditional because you're working on so many different projects at a time. And of course, in a Agile situation, the customer is talking to the product owner, and that customer is much more involved. So this idea of having a lot of change orders are really minimized in Agile. And the reason is because it's built for that customer to make those kind of adjustments in between those sprints. And so you want those changes because many times you're hitting that moving target when you're running Scrum or Agile or Kanban or any of those others in that particular way. So just something for you to think about. So you might think, wow, we don't have a lot of reports on the Agile side. You're not supposed to. You're doing it verbally. Everybody sees it. Everybody's talking. Everybody's working together. So let's go a step further to dashboards. Now, dashboards have become very popular, and dashboards, normally organizations will create a dashboard. Now, a dashboard actually has two main types of information on it. It's obviously going to have the numerical information, but a lot of times it's going to have graphics so that you have a visual of what's happening in those particular areas. Not every dashboard is going to be the same. And so I'm going to show you just a sampling of just a few that I thought were really good, but your dashboard that you have and maybe are already using might be perfect for your organization, yet you might not have any of the stuff that I'm getting ready to talk about, and that's okay. But the point is, a dashboard should have a visual component as well as the numerical information as well. So a positive of a dashboard is what we already know. Many of you are using so many of the color coding and all the different visuals and graphics to allow that, and many of you are already into the info graphics to where it allows your dashboards to have a little bit more flair, to show what is happening in some performance area. Nothing wrong with any of that. So many people are visual anyway, and so what happens is they notice the graphic more than they do the numerical number. And so the color coding and those type of things are all very beneficial for most people, unless people have some type of stigmatism or some type of they're colorblind or something like that. And so you have to think about it sometimes that all the color coding might not benefit some of your people because of that. So when we talk about positives of creating a customized dashboard, your dashboard is your dashboard. It doesn't matter that mine doesn't look like yours. That's fine. I might be measuring something totally different than what you need to measure. So you measure what is going to be needs to be reported to management, to your customer, to the sponsor, whoever it is you're doing this. So it increases visibility. It focuses your decision making to talk about the stuff that you're having trouble with the most. That's why you color code stuff. It's going to increase stakeholder engagement. It's going to reduce the risk because we do talk about the most important things, and you do your best to automate this. But once again, this is a challenge for some of the things that we measure, is it's not real well automated. And once again, that's where we're hoping that the AI is going to be able to tap into this, and some of the new tools that we're going to see will be very beneficial for this in the future. So let me just show you just some random dashboards that I thought were really good. One of the things I like about this, and this just happens to be a series of items, they're showing you the goal and compared to the actuals. I love these because this is bringing it down to numerical. And of course, all of this is on the money side, and we seem to do better on the money side and maybe even on the schedule than we do on other areas. But I like this because you see, this is what it's supposed to be. This is what it was. And so it allows you and your team, or you and management, to be able to talk about the comparing it instantly as you go down through here. Anything we can do to show here's where we are, here's where we thought we'd be, here's where we are. This is a good thing normally in talking to your customer or talking to management. Here's another one that I thought was really good. In this particular case, this is an overview of several projects, and notice that they're doing some of the earned value components, but they're also coming over to, on the right hand side, notice they've got a performance index, but then they do a forecast. The forecasting is becoming a much more positive note in performance reporting. And the reason for this is you're not just saying here's what we thought we were going to do and here's what we did, but your team's being able to forecast based on the resources and based on where they are in the project on what's going to happen in the future work. I love that, and you ought to love it too, because it allows your team to think outside the box. You're already using a piece of that in the Scrum. When you do your daily stand-ups and your Scrum team members all talk about what they did yesterday, what they're going to do today, and any impediments that they struggled with, all of that is that forecasting component verbally. But the point is, anything that we can do to help forecast this will also give some insights into a project manager or into management where they can help. But I like this reporting, and of course, obviously, in this case, they were looking at several different projects. This was probably going into a program for a program manager to look at. This was also going into at the program level, but I liked it real well because they had a series of 9 projects. Notice at the top, though, they talked about estimated start, estimated finish. They showed the actuals for each, and you could see this from a program standpoint, where you would be able to start looking to see, okay, what's happening to these projects? Why are we starting some of these slower than what we wanted to? And so it allows you just to be able to ask the questions. You're not zinging everybody because they didn't start perfectly on that day. There might be a good reason for that, but I thought it was a good starting point. This is one that's very common. Many of you probably do something like this. This is very common because most organizations, if you're doing traditional, you have something similar to this. You'll notice at the top, you've got your numerical metrics for everything. And then at the bottom, you're showing plan versus actual on cost and plan versus actual on your schedule or on your hours. And so most of us, for traditional, we measure this. But here's the thing I just want you to consider, okay? This might not be enough for you. Quality might need to be one of these pieces. And if you are going through a lot of churn in people, some of this is going to change anyway, because you're trying to get your people up to speed, get them trained to where they're going to be able to do the job. And so experienced people are always going to be more efficient than what your inexperienced people are going to be. So the thing is, where this is a very common thing, and so this probably, you look at this, you think, ah, yes, I know what this is. Well, that's because this is usually something, some method of this is being used in traditional projects almost everywhere. But you might need more than that. You might need to be looking more at the risk. You might need to look more at the performance itself and what group is performing and at what level. And so that might show you training gaps or something in that nature. But anyway, this is one that you ought to be pretty comfortable with. In this particular case, this was an overview of projects as well. And so they talked about the actuals that we talked about before. And then, of course, they brought it all the way over to where they were showing the actual durations. Now, the positive of something like this from a dashboard standpoint standpoint, if I'm looking at it for key performance indicators or from a sponsor or a project management office standpoint, is to look and see, do we see a pattern of where we are underestimating a project? Many times we will underestimate a project, not because of the one project. We might estimate it correctly, but we haven't taken into consideration that the same resources I'm using on this project is the same resources I'm using on 5 others. And you know as well as I do, with 5 projects going on, there's going to be that crisis that's going to happen at some point or some place, and it's going to take these people off. And so we're going to have a hiccup on several projects trying to put out the fire of this one over here. So just something for you to think about here. This was a key performance indicator a chart that I thought was interesting. I've never seen one like this, but I thought it was really interesting. Why I wanted to show you, they had key performance indicators, and then they looked at trying to decide when were they looking at this. Were they going to look at these daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually? Obviously, here's kind of the rule of thumb that we have a tendency to do. We'll have a tendency to look at these maybe monthly, quarterly if it's real high and we're having to do a lot to reach something. And then of course, if it's a crisis, we start looking at it daily. Because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's going wrong. And so now we're having 14,000 meetings trying to put the fires out. But the thing that you're looking at is that obviously if everybody's doing well, your meetings can be just periodic and the pressure's not on, but you are wanting to monitor this kind of stuff. But obviously if things are going wrong, you are increasing your meetings. That's part of the monitoring piece that you definitely are going to want to do with your people. Now, one other piece to this that I wanted to give you is, and talk about for a moment, that might help you, balanced scorecards. Now, balanced scorecards are typically used on the operational side, but you're starting to see a lot of projects, and especially project management offices, that are using some form of a balanced scorecard. And I'll show you a real simple template here in just a second. But balanced scorecards were actually created by a couple of professors from Harvard several years ago. Really, I think it was probably early 90s, if I recall. And it just allowed you with one document to be able to control a lot of things and talk to your supervisors and managers about what was happening. It started primarily on the operations side, but for program management offices, they've started realizing that this also can apply to them working with project managers for a series of projects, and it can even be drilled down to a project level if that's going to be beneficial to you. And so anyway, this allows managers to look at business from 4 critical aspects, and that's what they're doing, which is a little different. They look at it from the customer perspective. How do customers see us? They look at it from an internal perspective. What must we excel at? An innovation and learning perspective. Can we continue to improve and create value? And then financial perspective. How do we look at to stakeholders? Now you can see why this is was so much geared for operation. And I left this exactly the way it was by this author, by Katrick, because I thought this was really good for you to be able to see this as a foundation. So you can see from an operations standpoint that these would be the main drivers of this, okay? But you would still could have those similar categories, but have a little different questioning piece. Now, the following keywords are the most important when you're looking at a balanced scorecard. They're looking at goals. What were our goals for these things? Brief statements that describe what we must do. Measures, indicators that we use for monitoring our success. Targets, quantitative values, and initiatives. What do we have to do to get to reach or gain those given goals? And so as you look at this, what you'll see here, this is where we have a tendency to be able to use this at a project level. And the reason is because we do have a goal in that project to achieve certain things. We have measures and targets and initiatives because we are trying to deliver value to that customer, with depending on how we're running that particular project. But a balanced scorecard is a possibility that would help you too to be able to do some of these. Now, this is the template I was talking about and referring to. So this is a very simplistic template. You might need something far more sophisticated than this, but they've taken the 4 categories for the balanced scorecard, which is going to be financial, the customer, the internal, innovation, and learning. And then they've looked at what is the measures, what's the target, what's the performance, and what's the initiatives, and it allows you to have those categories. Of course, balanced scorecarding, you can find tons of books on that online without any problem because it's been out for so long, but you're looking at it more for the project side, and that's rather than this balanced scorecard. There's a ton of authors who've written on balanced scorecard, but the operational side is just a little bit different different twist. So you're looking for those who've already twisted it toward the project management side. Now, before I go into performance of vendors, let me open up the chat, and I want to give you these 4 books that I want to talk about here. So let me stop this for just a moment. Let me open up this chat, and so that I can type these in. If you want those, you can cut and paste those into your Word document if you want to. All right, so I've got those. And so if you open up your chat, I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to put them in the chat for you. So if you go ahead and open up your chat, I'll show you these, and then you'll have the name of it right here in chat. You can just cut and paste it in a Word document or something. Okay, so I've already started off showing you this by Kerzner. Kerzner's the big PM guru. You're going to love him. He lays the proper foundation. His books are all phenomenal. And so this is the first one by Kerzner, Project Management Metrics, KPIs, Dashboards. Excellent tool. A second one that we've used with this is called Key Performance Indicators. Key Performance Indicators. This is by Marr, M-A-R-R. And so this is an excellent tool to give you some direction of what can we measure, what should we be measuring. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, what can I measure? And so every organization might be a little different on what you need to be measuring. Let me give you a third one here real quick. Metrics for project management. Metrics for project management is an excellent tool, and this will actually drill down into project management where you're actually measuring some other things. And so I'm getting ready to put them in the chat right now, Lalitha, and so you're going to get them right now. And so this is by Rad and Levin. And then the last one I want to recommend to you, this is called Value-Based Metrics for Improving Results. And this happens to be by Schnipter and Rollins. And so let me put it in the chat. So if your chat is open, here it comes. So you should be getting it right now. So all of those are in the chat. And so with each of these, the purpose behind these, some of the metric books that we all read and we've seen, they talk about earned value. Well, most of us, we've seen earned value. We've learned earned value for so long. And so what happens is it allows us, we have those components already connected with our organization. And so what we're trying desperately to do is to come up with some other metrics that might be valuable. And here's the thing that you're going to have to think about. If AI does continue to evolve, like I think it's going to do, especially for project management, the stuff we're measuring right now might not be the same stuff that we measure in the future at all. And so we have to be versatile. Many of you have a lot of years left in the career of project management. So you're going to find yourself having to measure something in the future that you're not measuring right now. Or some of these things that is very laborious in trying to come up with the metric might be something that happens in a matter of a few seconds because it just pops up and tells you what's happening on each of your projects, and you're able to read the performance indicators and what's happening because it gathers the information extremely quick. So that's going to be an awesome piece if it does indeed do this. All right, so let's take our metric, let's take our performance and go one step further and go with the vendor. Vendor performance comes up in almost every seminar, good vendor performance and bad, because we all know that that's one of the struggles that we get into with working with the vendors, how to get them to perform. So all this that comes to vendor performance has to come back down to what are we doing with that contract. And so your contract with procurement, it has to be a great working relationship. So you've got to have clear language. What is the level of quality you're expecting that person or that vendor to provide, and making sure that's quantitative. How are you paying that vendor? Paying them across on time is one of the worst ideas that anybody can have. You're needing to pay them based on some type of deliverable so that they're providing something to you is what you're looking for. So the thing is that your procurement people should be able to help coach you in being able to set those things up of how that vendor is going to be paid based on that deliverable. And so you're looking for some type of deliverable. The challenge you get into on the contracts is that we want fixed price, and fixed price limits us. It also takes the risk off of us, but it limits us too, because for a fixed price, it puts the risk on the vendor and takes the risk off of us. But every time you want a change order, the problem is that you get charged for a change order fee, which is usually pretty substantial. And so that's the reason why many people are trying to do the Scrum or Agile. And the reason is they want the flexibility to make those changes. So you've got two different types of contracts that you might find yourself having to do. And so one's going to be your fixed price, which many try to do for the traditional projects, but many find it very, very limiting when you're talking about the Scrum. So let's talk for a moment about the purpose of a contract. So you're looking at legalized working agreements. It gives structure to the working relationship, collaboration with partners. It helps you consider risk associated with the contract types. And so once again, the reason why people go with a fixed price is it's a limited amount. They know they're only paying that top amount. And so that's why people like fixed price contract. But you have to think through a little bit further. If you're going to have a gazillion change orders, then that fixed price contract might not be as risk adverse as what you're thinking it might be. It might actually be costing you a lot more. And so that's always something you're having to think about. And the contracts can be tailored to build that right kind of partnership with that vendor. And so you have to think about it with, okay, if the vendor is going to be doing the project, how am I going to measure, how am I measuring performance? And can I make it clear to the vendor I'm measuring performance like that? Because the vendor is going to have to be doing something for me to be able to know what's happening with their project. One of the things too that you might consider, many of you maybe do this, but I was teaching a vendor class for the university a few years ago, and I read a book on vendor orientation, and I so buy into this, and many of you I think do this already. Vendor orientation is usually more than just a real brief 15-minute meeting with your new vendor, on a Zoom call. You're wanting to be able to go through the orientation of what they're going to be doing, who they're working with, and the expectations of that contract verbally, so that it's crystal clear. But vendor orientation is critical because you're talking about several things. And so I put in here some things I thought were really good. Frequency of reporting. How much interaction are you going to have with this vendor? So if you're wanting them to give you a report every week, then that's going to be, then that needs to be talked about. And then probably that was something that should have been part of the contract. Priority when contacting them. And this is always one that I talk about. They've got my cell phone. I've got their cell phone. I've got their boss's cell phone. We want to be able to escalate this puppy if things aren't going right, because once again, you are the person responsible for the project. So you can't be that passive person in some of these situations. You're going to have to escalate. You're going to have to, what can I do to inch this project forward? Given early warning signs that there is a potential issue or a problem. And so you're wanting to talk to that vendor. I don't want surprises from my vendor. Nobody on this call wants surprises from the vendor. Now, I can handle problems and hiccups just like you can, but we don't want surprises. So I want the vendor calling and saying, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. Here's what's happened. We've lost our SME and we're trying to hire another SME and bring them over from another project, but I don't have one the next couple of days. I just want to give you a heads up. See, we like that heads up from that vendor. And we understand it. We get it. You lost your SME. I mean, that's a very common thing. But at the same time, you're not wanting to have a phone call or a meeting that you think the SME is showing up. And that's when all of a sudden they tell you, guess what? We don't have a SME for that now. They've gone someplace else. You want that vendor to be in there escalating it, or at least giving you the heads up. And then once again, the cell phone numbers, the contact information, you're wanting every piece of this. Now, discussing the specific reports and measurements with the vendor. I'm not wanting to have to drag my vendor down to get the reports and stuff that we need. There's certain reports that we need in order for that vendor to be paid. Now, CPI and SPI has become a no-brainer in any federal project. Many of you that work for state government, you're doing CPI and SPI. Nothing wrong with that in traditional projects. Much more difficult to try to pull off if you're doing Scrum or Agile. Much more difficult. And so critical path reports, those are fine. But once again, critical path reports are only good if they have been connected to the project that has been baselined and we're measuring it with some consistency across through there. Level of defects, bugs, issue logs, number of user stories delivered, number of features implemented, total velocity, what's our average number of features or user stories or story points that we're doing in Agile or Scrum, ratio of budget to completion. A lot of times we're asking for information like this, and many times, once again, the budget piece is normally going to be for something that's internal or something that's going to be on a cost plus contract or a contract where the customer is in charge of the money. Ratio to budget and completion is not going to be there for a fixed price contract because the vendor is tracking their own money. They don't want to let you know what the ratio of budget is to completion because they're in charge of doing a certain amount of work for a certain price. So some of these will not work on a fixed price contract. And then tracking the vendor and the contract compliance. Many of you have to do this. You maybe didn't pick the vendor, but you are working with that vendor to make sure they comply. So making sure you have clear, comprehensive contract without any ambiguity. And there's always a component of ambiguity in most contracts. Even when I taught contracting at the university for projects, one of the things we get into is that there's that element of ambiguity. And sometimes you don't even spot it until you have that situation, whatever that situation is that you need it to be clear right here, and it's not there. It's not in that contract. Then you verify timelines, deliverables, payment terms, establish good, consistent communication. If I called my vendor, I want my vendor picking up my call. Even if he or she can't talk to me right then, they might say, hey, I'm in a meeting. Can I give you a call back in 15 minutes? I can handle that. All of us can. We know that vendor is going to be busy, but I want my call to be a priority to them. Just like if they call me, I want that to be a priority for them too. That vendor's called me. I want to be able to get back with them before I go to lunch or as soon as I get out of that meeting, because I want it to be a priority on all sides. So status meetings, checkup meetings, documentation, whatever it is that we think we need from that vendor and that vendor needs from us, we want to be able to build into that relationship those kind of characteristics. So let's talk about documentation a moment. Sometimes on documentation, we can get carried away. And then, of course, if you're doing Scrum or Agile, sometimes you hear that there is no documentation, which is not true. But documentation, specific documentation, the vendor must provide. So this is going to be something normally on a performance side, performance reports, a list of what's going wrong, a list of some things, some actions that they're doing to fix some things. All of that's fine. But in addition to this, on the traditional side, for those of you who are doing software development and product development, and you're trying not to hire the vendor back, you've got to have a piece of something in that contract that's going to allow that documentation to be there so that your people are going to be able to maintain what it is that vendor's building for you. A lot of times we're asking for this documentation, but we didn't put anything in the contract. So put a chunk of information into that contract and work with your procurement so that you can have your people, the documentation there, but you also have people shadowing that vendor through portions of it so that they can maintain it. That will solve a lot of these frustrations where we have to hire the vendor back because our people don't know what to do. Also dispute issues, and there might be dispute issues that come up. What's the process for dealing with these? Addressing issues early and talking about them early, research mistakes, see if the customer or the vendor is obligated to fix it. We get in a little spitting contest on whose problem is this. Did the vendor mess something up? Then they should be fixing, or did we mess something up? And so we should be paying for them to have to fix it. So we have to get into those kind of discussions. All right, so performance involves so much on tracking. So tracking in traditional projects is pretty straightforward. You make sure goals and assignments are clear. You have communicate consistently the goals and objectives. Your team knows about it. You'll conduct lessons learned per phase or per deliverable. Listen to the full details from the PM or the team members, and then place the knowledge from the lessons learned into future planning. Now you'll notice here the one little caveat that I did that might be a little different for you. Notice that I've talked about lessons learned at the end of each phase or deliverable, not just at the end of a project. This is one of the new waves of people, of your project management professionals that are out here that are looking at this and realizing that we can learn so much if we would increase the number of lessons learned that we would do for our project. And so at the end of a phase, doing a lessons learned, you'll learn from phase one and carry that over to phase two. And so you could do that per deliverable as well. And so many of the big time project managers out there are saying, consider that on some of these where we're trying to learn all the way as we go through. And so you're setting that up as a particular spot for learning. On the tracking of the Agile projects or a hybrid type project, you attend as many face-to-face meetings as possible. You listen to the changes the customer desires. You conduct a retrospective after each iteration, continue to place new knowledge into the current plan. Now you'll notice, for those of you, just as a reminder, you know that the retrospective is really the same thing as a lessons learned, called a retrospective in Agile or Scrum. And so what happens is you do it at the end of each iteration. So your iterations are running, let's say, 4 weeks long. So iteration one, we do a retrospective. And so we take that information as we get ready to start iteration number 2. And so you do that for the capability of being able to learn as you go along. And so it allows your team to be able to grow and to learn in all of these aspects. Now let's go one step further with project methodologies. The performance that we're trying to track might be different based on the methodology. So with what we're looking at today, we have traditional, which is obviously the one that has been out the longest. And then since 2000, we've started working with Agile and Scrum. And so we've been exposed to that. But Agile and Scrum has hiccups just like traditional does at times. And so many of you have found yourself in something that is kind of a no man's land of using hybrid. So you're in a traditional organization, but you're doing Scrum, but the Scrum is having to convert some of their performance over to traditional metrics. And I hear your pain, because that's where we are across the country in so many cases. Just for checking, just for kicks and grins, how many of you have some type of situation similar to that? You're in a traditional organization, but you're running Scrum or Agile or some type of hybrid type of situation, and you're having to convert your metrics over to something there. Okay, I see some thumbs up. Anybody else in that situation? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That is a difficult place to be because it doesn't fit that easy. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the thumbs going up. So I think that's a huge challenge when you're looking at these. So you remember on traditional, it's called waterfall, and so it's command and control. So you plan your project up front, you work your project according to the baseline, and you deliver it at the end. Change orders are very formal because once again, we have to re-baseline based on the money, based on the schedule. And so it's very formal. So traditional project management follows that type of sequencing. Those of you who are using Agile or Scrum, it's change driven. And that's the reason why you're using that, is you want those ability to be able to make those adjustments and those changes. You want that ability to be able to go in a different direction. So, and then you hand off a piece of that project at the end of each iteration for the customer to go ahead and start playing with and giving feedback on what works well and what feels a little clumsy to them. And so you have a retrospective at the end, but right before that retrospective, you have a sprint review or a sprint demo, and that you let the customer be able to see what the new features and functionality are for them to start working with and start using immediately. And of course, you're working alongside a product owner who's in control of all the user stories or features that's going to be used for the project. And then hybrid can be any kind of combination of any of these, because it includes a combination of both the traditional and Agile methods. It can look and feel similar to traditional because you might have one project that's a hybrid that has a lot of strong controls, and your next one might be more like an Agile project and it's still a hybrid because you've got a lot more flexibility and a lot more freedom to be able to do some things. And so you see the full gamut here of from very strong and controlled to very loose over here on Agile, and then hybrid is going to be someplace in the middle there. As we look at special areas to watch for predictable performance, that's what it really gets down to. And so did we do things right up front, which now gives us the right type of performance on the back end? So what about the right methodology? Are we using the right methodology, or should we have done something different there? And a lot of times that's an entire discussion on its own. Assessing the risk thoroughly, managing changes with proper restrictions, ensuring quality at all levels, balancing resources, tools, techniques for high performance. Right now, the resource issue is really pretty tight. Most organizations are running on a skeleton crew, and so you might be running on one as well, but yet all the projects are still coming down the pipeline, and so you've got the same skeleton crew doing all the projects in so many cases. And so it's creating a little bit of havoc because you maybe aren't fully staffed yet. And we are seeing that happen across the board. Let's go a little deeper into measuring project metrics themselves. The most common metric that we have seen is the earned value management. It has been driven by PMI, and of course, it's a good metric. There's nothing wrong with that. Many are starting to look at performance indicators. Some are starting to look at key performance indicators, which are normally going to be associated with strategic goals and objectives. And then many will actually do critical success factors. So let me give you a little bit more information on each of these if these are new to you. So earned value management, which has been around probably the longest, focuses on quantitative tracking the project using planned value and earned value actual costs. Here's what we plan, here's what the actual costs are. And so you're looking for gaps. You're looking for how are we doing? Did it take the cost the same amount that we thought it was going to be? And so you're doing that. And so you're coming up with either a positive or negative if you're doing cost variance or schedule variance, and you're coming up with a percentage if you're doing cost performance index or schedule performance index. So it gives you a percentage of what we're doing on that particular item. And so this has been around a long time, and it's not anything wrong with it. It's a great tool, but it's harder when you're looking at agile and hybrid for these. Measuring projects with performance indicators. Performance indicators are usable metrics for people, projects, programs, organizational goals. Performance indicators are more general. They have a versatility to adjust to whatever one desires. So the difference that, and I went ahead and put this in for performance indicator separate from key performance indicator, is that you might have a performance indicator for a project or a program and it not be necessarily one that's super clear for the strategic goal, like a key performance indicator. So I split the hair on that because you see that in some situations. So this one is going to be more in line with meeting a program goal than necessarily the organization, even though ultimately your program goal should be driving the organizational goals too. But this is more so we're aligning with, say, a program goal or a project goal. It's what the performance indicator was. So measuring projects with KPIs, key performance indicators, consistently measure progress toward the organizational goal. So this is going to be your strategic plan most of the time. So the primary benefit of using KPIs is that you know that over time we're understanding more and more of the strategic goals, but it helps with communication of bringing the organizational goal all the way down to the project level, which is a huge driver in almost any of your literature right now in project management, is that almost everybody believes that the common project management team should understand that this is driving that strategic goal to some extent. And then also your critical success factors focus on factors or essentials the project needs for success. And so it connects to the values, the goals, the corporate value, vision, the CSFs could be unique, customized per organization, and they might differ from one another because, once again, you might have a totally different set of success factors for your particular type of project, for that particular project than what someone else might have. Now, one of the things that we get into is, once again, earned value management. A lot of times people, if you live by this, and so many of us have on the traditional side, you think that's got to happen for every project. And that's the dynamic that's happening right now, which is making PMOs a little more difficult in trying to measure the success of an agile or hybrid project compared to a traditional. So earned value is used when comparing cost and schedule of a project. Almost every manager, every executive in an organization goes back to cost and schedule because that is how we've measured it. But what are we going to do in the future when cost and schedule is two of the things, but it's not all the things that we're needing to measure? So performance indicators will use qualitative means for measuring and evaluating the project's performance, quality, customer satisfaction, levels of communication, meeting customer needs, reducing errors. I mean, you've got a lot of other components that's there. Almost all of us know that this happens when a project starts tanking. We know that communication is normally a hiccup in that situation. And almost every survey will say that 85% of these surveys say that communication tanked when the project started going downhill. And so that means that they did not get enough communication or the right communication. And so, for an example, am I getting the right communication? That's a huge deal in a project. And anybody who's worked on projects know if I'm not getting the right information, my decisions are always going to be slanted because there's something I don't know about that piece of information. And so I'm making a decision without understanding the total message that I should be getting. Some folks will use continuous improvement to impact performance. All of you know that the new 7th edition PMBOK is driving continuous improvement even more. And of course, as you look at Agile and Scrum, continuous improvement is a piece of that. And so pre-mortem meetings. Are you doing pre-mortem meetings? And so this allows you an opportunity to start meeting and talking about some things before you get into the lessons learned in the postmortem type meeting of what we did, what we would do differently. Quarterly lessons learned or retros. This is becoming huge. I think you're going to see more literature on this because I can learn as I go all the way through the project. Capturing lessons learned throughout the project, creating action plans for new ideas, adjust processes for speed and reducing waste. Process improvement is going to be a big piece of everything that we're doing. And many of our processes haven't been touched possibly in 20 years. And yet these are struggling because it's requiring redundant sign-offs. It's requiring redundant waiting time in many of our projects. And so we're screaming that we want the project to run faster. And yet we're putting it into a system that does nothing but block those situations. And so that we have to be able to come back, and somebody's got to talk about the elephant in the room, that we can scream success and faster all we want, but until the processes, somebody's willing to tackle the processes and change that. I'm not saying to take away everything, every sign off, but make sure that it fits where we are today in our project processes, and keep a knowledge log, new information, what we're learning, what we can do differently. Now, there's some triggers to watch that will help you a little bit. Milestone delays. In the area of performance, do you track milestones? Milestones normally are one of the things that we'll talk with management about. And many of you maybe don't track milestones, and that's okay. But that is something that could be tracked to give you some heads up that we've got some problems. If you're missing all these milestones along the way, then eventually you're going to miss something substantial in that project. So delay in milestones can be an early warning that the project is having performance issues. And so it just allows you to start talking about it early before something really happens. Budget overruns, even small budget overruns, can mean the project is not performing correctly, but there could be justifiable reasons why you've had a hiccup in the budget. Scope creep. Now, scope creep and change orders are not the same thing. Scope creep means that we are having the scope creeping out beyond what we thought it should be because people are putting in additional features that in some cases, maybe we didn't get it at the right time. Maybe we didn't get it when we were gathering the requirements. So scope creep is creeping. It's not a legitimate change order. Legitimate change order, everybody knows about. And then also changes are authorized, but scope creep is small expansions of the project scope. And sometimes, and you kind of weigh this with yourself and see how this fits in your environment. Sometimes the scope creep that I see is scope creep because we were getting so much pressure to get the project underway that what happened is that we got it underway, but we really didn't have all the scope. Now, we thought we did, and we had a scope document, and we had a statement of work, but we really didn't get all the scope. And so 4 months into the project, we're in meetings, and all of a sudden here comes the rest of the scope that we didn't get and that we should have gotten up front. And you'll see that happen sometimes on traditional projects. And then, of course, the communication breakdown that I talked about before, because it becomes strained with the vendor or the customer. And sometimes you'll even see people who are not even talking to each other because they're upset with each other. That doesn't normally help your project. And then quality starting to slip. Lower quality can quickly deviate project outcomes through rework, additional testing, and suck down a lot of time. So we're not wanting that quality to slip, even though we all have hiccups in all of these from time to time. Okay, there's no silver bullet. Okay, there's no silver bullet. All of us have a hiccup at times, but the point is you want to be able to catch it as early as possible. So simple tracking process. And so you're look at the goal, the standard, the requirement. That's what you're going back to as a project manager. Request updates, quantitative dashboards or reports. Evaluate the data, compare the projected to actuals is what you're looking for. And then also discuss the gaps and the next steps. And so you're discussing the gaps and the next steps with your team, with your vendor, or maybe even with the people who are actually doing that actual work, just to make sure that we all have a heads up on what's going on here and that that's being monitored. And what you'll find is your team will rally to that level of work. They'll rally to it and they'll be supportive and they'll do their best. Most people, let me just kind of give you this little checkpoint. Most people don't come to work on your project thinking, how can I screw this project up today? I mean, sometimes we think that, we think, man, how could they have screwed it up like that? But most people didn't get up and think, yep, this is the day I'm screwing that project up. Most people don't do that, but it does happen because we had a hiccup over here and we didn't anticipate this hiccup, and here it comes over here, and now we've had another one. And a lot of times it's you've got good people, but it could be that it's beyond their skill level, and it could just be that they were thinking in smaller bite-sized pieces. You and I maybe look at a lot wider frame of reference. We're looking way down the road of what could go wrong. They're trying to put out the fires as they get through it every day. All right, so let's look at our last handful of slides here real quick. So promoting a culture of transparency. Those of you in the Agile and Scrum side or on the hybrid side, you're hearing a lot about transparency. Transparency means that I'm not holding anything back. I'm not hiding anything. I'm letting people know as much information as I possibly can. So a culture of transparency means the internal organization promotes, gives information, discusses hard topics or ideas without fear of any negative repercussions from management or other team members. So we can talk about any of these things that we're struggling with. So that process, let me just chase a rabbit here, okay? Because this is a kind of a hotbed. So this old process that we're having to go through, and it's sitting on somebody's desk 3 weeks, we can talk about that without repercussions of somebody slapping our hands because we brought up the elephant in the room. So that process can be talked about with management, and we can make a suggestion of how to streamline that process. Or we can make a suggestion that this document has to be able to come out of that office within 48 hours. It can't sit 3 weeks and 4 weeks on somebody's desk. And when you get caught in those situations, you've got, where people think, well, I can't talk about it, then nothing's going to get better. Once again, we can scream better performance, but people are going to point to that one piece right there that's killing all the performance that people are trying to do efficiently. So increasing trust, it increases trust with management. Team members do not attempt to hide a problem or an issue. Why? I can talk about anything. We can bring anything up that we need to look at and examine. Many of you maybe also include something called a predictability indices. So timeliness of forecast, accuracy of forecast, deviations at completion. So how accurate are these forecasts? It goes back to what we were talking about before. Are we biased? And let's just call it the way it is. We are biased sometimes. I mean, we do read information, and I might play the Ned the Negaholic a little bit on that information because we've had hiccups there before, or I could be super positive because we've never had a hiccup there, and I could be biased from the positive side. So what I'm really wanting to do is to be able to have that ability to look at the real information from a real standpoint. Timeliness for forecast. Forecasting is becoming more and more popular. It focuses on predicting the amount of time it will take to complete a project or an activity accurately. The ability to accurately predict the time it takes to complete a project, ensure the estimates are correct, the resources assigned to the project will be adequate. But where you're really seeing this expand is you're predicting what you're going to be doing tomorrow or the next day, or you're predicting how things are going to run with that next deliverable that you're going to be working on. And so some of this is really some pretty common language between you and the project manager, or you and the team, or you and the customer, in predicting and forecasting what's going to be happening in the next week or 2 weeks. And so you're doing this is once again going back to that transparency of, wow, this is a really difficult piece that we're looking at. We've got 3 weeks. I hope we're going to be able to do it in 3 weeks, but we're really struggling. Our SME is having some health problems. And so it allows you to have that transparency all the way around to be able to bring some of those things up. Now, there's some formulas here that were given out a little bit in some of these books, and so let me hit these real quick here. And so total number of tasks completed or on or before the predicted completion date. And so you'll find people who will look for timeliness of the forecast. And so it allows you to look at the predicted completion date for the task compared to the actual. So how good are we at predicting is really what you're looking at. So what's our accuracy of our forecast? Anybody can say anything, but you're not wanting it to just be real subjective. And so what you're wanting everything to do, even with your project plans and estimates, is to be somewhere between 5 and 10%. PMI, I think, has taken definitive as a -5 to a +10% range. Is what PMI has done. But what you're wanting to do is to be able to do this, that have this accuracy of range with most of your stuff, with your people. And then, of course, accuracy of your forecast, like we were talking about, you're looking at predicted costs, the quality, the time, also time to complete something. You're wanting people to be able to have a good feel of that and anticipate all the steps that need to be there. Deviations at completion, difference between the predicted predicted and the actuals. Deviation can be positive or negative. If negative deviations are consistent, it can mean the organization must change processes and estimation procedures. And so what this does, this tells us that the problem that we're trying to fix is really something we need to be working on at the front end of this. Our process might not be exactly right, or we've got too many steps in the process that maybe we don't need, and we can examine that. Once again, the transparency that we can at least talk about these things. And then, of course, they gave you a formula for deviations. All this will be on the video, and you'll get a link to all of this on that video that we'll send you later today. Now, let me show you a couple of things. I listed a couple of resources here, but let me talk about a couple of things as we come to the close of this. August 28 and 29, we are doing a public seminar virtually. I'm going to be teaching it. It's called Secrets to Managing Virtual Projects and Remote Teams. It's a brand new seminar. We tested it out with our FAA client in Washington, D.C. this summer, and so really enjoyed this. And so the price is $299 per person. So if you're interested in being part of this, this is a public course. And so all you have to do is go to our website and sign up, and would love to have you. So it's going to be August 28, 29, register with PMI, so you'll have PDUs for it and the whole deal. The other thing that we're going to be doing in August, our August webinar is going to be examining support processes to stabilize hybrid project delivery. In the research that we've been doing and writing on with hybrid, one of the challenges is that you don't have support processes that help you get through some of these hiccups with hybrid. And so we're going to be talking about those. This is a big deal. So it's going to be August the 11th, same time, 10 to 11, like we have here. Love to have you in that particular group. Virtual PMP exam prep boot camps. We have 3 more left this year. So we have August 7 through 10, October 10 through 13, and December 4 through 7. I will tell you that we are running a 97% first-time passing rate. All of these are virtual. And so we would love to have some of your people in. If you've ever thought about taking the test and you were scared of calculation questions, there are no calculations that you're having to do for the PMP right now. And so that will take care of that. Also, for anyone who is kind of thinking about the PMP, I'm doing free mastermind groups. I do 3 of these a year. This will be our last one for this year, September 11 through 15. It's 5 days long, but it's not actual 5 days. You do about an hour's worth of stuff each day for 5 days, and we look at your experience. We talk about filling out the application, what it takes for you to be able to take the PMP, and we do a couple of Zoom calls and answer your questions. And so you have 5 different little lessons that you're doing to help get you ready to fill out your application and stuff. I do 2 Zoom calls. I'm the one who does both Zoom calls. And the other piece that's good, this gives you the lowest price of $1,550 to be able to take the PMP boot camp that we offer. And we also give a free scholarship to one person from that each mastermind group. And so you might be that person. And so we pay for you to come to the boot camp for free. We give you that scholarship. And so we do that with every one of those. So that's something for you to maybe think about as well. So let me open this up. I've got a couple of hands, and I've got a couple of things here with on chat. So let me see if I can open this up for you guys and answer a couple of things here. So let me look at the chat here real quick. So I gave you Kerzner's stuff. Let's see here. Okay, I gave you the Kerzner's things. Joel, you've got your hand up, buddy. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, how's it going? I was just wondering for the webinars that you were just talking about, do you have an idea of how many PDUs we'll be able to earn for those?
Okay, so every one of our webinars is set up for 1 PDU is how it's been registered. And so anything that you miss, we've got them all on our website. And so you can go back and pick up any that you're needing to go ahead and complete your recertification. So you have access to all of those on themathisgroup.com. So you can pick all of those up.
Does that apply also for the 2-day seminar that you were just talking about?
The 2-day seminar, we haven't registered it yet. I think it will be somewhere between 13 and 14 PDUs is what that will be.
Great, thanks.
Did I answer what you're asking me about that?
Yep, that did it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions? Well, thank you so much for being on here with us. Listen, I hope you have a wonderful weekend with your family. Thank you so much for being part of all of these. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.